I'm Anushka Pareek.
Hello, I'm Sreenandhana.
Hello everyone, I'm Subasree Vasantamurli.
Hello, I'm Gangotri.
Hello, and I am Manaswini Bhandari. Today, get ready to set sail through history with us. In the grand narrative of human history, there exists scarcely a figure whose presence looms as large and consequential as Christopher Columbus. His legacy is woven with threads of daring spirits of exploration, thrilling adventure, and the monumental discovery of uncharted territories. But today, his expeditions evoke controversy due to their impact on the indigenous population. The encounters between Columbus and the native people of the Americas resulted in complex dynamics, prompting a nuanced examination of historical narratives and their implications for contemporary understanding. Born in the Republic of Genoa in 1451, Columbus, with the curiosity as boundless as the seas he longed to explore, set out to uncover the legendary riches of the Orient with the support of the Christian sovereign in 1942, propelled by a victorious spirit following their triumph over the Moors. Together, they harbored grand ambitions of spreading Christianity to every corner of the world, fueling Columbus's daring quest across the unknown seas. Come along as we set sail on a captivating voyage through Christopher Columbus's early expeditions, weaving together a rich tapestry of historical insights, numerical data, and the intricate motivations that cemented Columbus as one of the history's most pivotal yet controversial figures. So grab your compass and prepare to chart a course through the untold stories of exploration and conquest, with Columbus leading the way into the unknown.
Sreenandhana and I will be talking about the first voyage in detail, trying to explain its nuances, interpreting and analyzing the journey through our perspective. Further, through this video, we would also try to understand the voyage from the language and the writings of Christopher Columbus himself and try to explain the entries in detail as per our understanding. August 3, 1492, the Italian explorer Christopher Columbus started his much awaited voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. With a crew of 90 men and 3 ships, the Nina, Pinta and Santa Maria, he left from Palos de la Frontera, Spain, in search of India. Christopher Columbus definitely deserves some credit from us for the courageous and tedious journey that he undertook. No doubt, Vasco da Gama and Magellan and other famous travelers undertook more difficult voyages in the past. But unlike Christopher, they knew where they were going, who set sail to an unknown land with great hopes, which makes this voyage more important and adventurous. From the records that we have, there are many interesting aspects of this journey. One among them is the art of navigation. Admiral Columbus, according to the records that we have, was the first in Spain to teach the art of navigating in the whole wide ocean by measuring the height in degrees of the sun and the North Star. Though it was taught in the schools, few had dared to try it out at sea. In reality, none at all. For this is a science which cannot be translated into actual knowledge unless it is practiced very large stretches of sea from the coast. Coming back to the voyage undertaken by Columbus, the sole reason behind the voyage is clear right from the very beginning: his quest for gold. He has mentioned his desire to find gold in multiple instances. Further adding to this, Columbus was somebody who knew the value and importance of gold right from the beginning, and thus every time he found his crew members grow tired and disappointed, he encouraged them with the idea of finding gold and growing rich. He was also a very tactical explorer who was aware on how to convince the crown. Therefore, Columbus used the gold as his bait to convince the king and queen to help him in venturing into the ocean. From the very beginning, thus, Columbus makes sure to mention the huge amounts of gold available almost in all his entries. Religion also then seems to be another main motive for his journey. Not content with the holy and victorious enterprise which the queen and king had in hand, they decided to spread the Christian faith in the new lands that was to be found by Christopher Columbus. Columbus thus makes sure, right from the very first entry, He writes about his faith and his actions in spreading the Christianity in a very detailed manner. One very curious aspect of Christopher Columbus' traveling techniques is that he did not tell his crew each day how far they traveled. There are many speculations around this. One major theory is that the sailors of the 15th century were superstitious and wary of venturing too far from land. We learn from his journals that he was concerned the crew might be dismayed if the voyage proved too long. And constantly he encouraged his sailors with the hope of growing rich and also by underwriting the miles they travelled. Interpretation of locals are very important aspect in all the 4 voyages. On 11th of October 1492, they finally spotted the land. From the sources we had, the first man to sight land was a sailor called Rodrigo. Columbus describes the land and the nature of the location they reached in great detail. The very first interpretation of the locals by Christopher Columbus is a very interesting point to note, where he says, I would like to quote his words, "They should be good servants and very intelligent, for I have observed that they soon repeat anything that is said to them. And I believe that they would easily be made Christians, for they appear to have no religion, God willing. When I make my departure, I will bring a half a dozen back to them, to their majesties, so that they can learn to speak. I saw no animals of any kind on the island except parrots." Columbus, right from the beginning, has a very preconceived notion on the culture of the native Indians, their ideologies and practices. In another one of the passages written by Christopher Columbus, we find him saying that they willingly traded everything they had. They seem to me a people very short of everything. They all go naked as their mothers bore them, including the women. From the beginning, it is very clear that Christopher Columbus considers himself superior among the locals and them as barbarians and savages. He cares to mention about these people not because he wants to know about their practices or culture, but because they're part of the landscape he writes. For example, when he speaks about the native Indians, we find him saying that here there are small dogs, and here we also met a man who wore in his nose a small piece of gold, not bothering to find any difference from a dog and a man. One thing that's clear is Columbus did not try to understand the language or the livelihood of the people. Columbus' primary perception of the native Indians was a mixture of authoritarianism and condescension. His attitude and cruelty towards the islanders will increase to a great extent in the following voyages. Columbus always saw the people as a other phenomenon. He continuously, at various instances, tries to undermine the native Indians, classifying and describing them as aliens and everything that he was not. The rest of the voyage and the quest of barbarianism and the definition of others will be explained much more clearly in the next part.
Columbus proceeds his journey and reaches Cuba. The account describes that the local inhabitants of the island fled with their portable items to the mountains on seeing the ship and formed a hindrance in understanding the nature of the island. He assigned 2 Christians and 1 Indian to go and inquire about the settlement. The account says that the men of the village provided them wooden seats with gold carvings to sit, while they themselves sat on the ground. These people came and kissed the feet and hands of the Spaniards, thinking that they had come from the sky. The natural resources of the region are mentioned, which includes maize and large quantities of cotton, which the natives happily gave in return for a leather tag. When inquired about the availability of gold, pearls or spices, they answered that these are present in the island called Bohio or Hispaniola, which lies in the east. Columbus then heads eastwards. He also takes at least 1 native of each country, which he says is to give an account of the nature of these countries. He reaches a series of tall islands which he describes was uninhabited, but the remains of fishermen's fire on the shores are taken as an indication of men coming here for hunting and fishing expeditions. The entry says that this makes sense because the natives are used to unhygienic eating habits. Columbus comes across many islands which he names after the royal family and Christianity. He lands on Hispaniola on 9th of December. The natives ran out of terror as they saw him, but he caught a girl who was wearing a piece of flat gold hanging from her nose. With the help of the Indian interpreter, the natives were convinced that the Spaniards descended from the sky and were looked upon with awe. The natives informed that the land from which they obtained gold lies further east. On 18 December, the king of this island named Tortuga arrived with great ceremony. The king ate along with the Spaniards and gave a particular kind of belt as a gift. In return, the admiral gifted him a cushion the king fancied and other items like beads, slippers, etc. It is mentioned that the king was delighted and promised that the entire island was at his disposal if the admiral needed any help. Later, as Columbus lost his ship, the king of the island offered him great help. Following this, the natives of the island are described as the best people in the world. On 26 December, a ship arrived from another island with some gold sheets to barter with bells, which the people valued more. The king, on knowing that the admiral admires gold, promised him that he will bring large quantities for him from Cibao, where gold is abundant. The king then complained about the Caribs who were harming his people. On showing the weapons, the admiral comforted the king by promising to defend them. It is mentioned that out of this happiness, Columbus decided to make a settlement here so that the Christians could gather more information by mingling with the natives. Thus, they began building a fort. As he left the settlement, he told the king that he was leaving behind some Christians for the protection of the natives. On 13 January, on the beach at Cabo Enamorado, the Spaniards met some fierce-looking Indians with bows and arrows standing prepared for war. The first brush took place between Indians and Christians. As Columbus left for Castile, he began noticing many small fishes and seabirds. A storm hit the ship and the crew resorted to prayers and devotions. It was during this event that a parchment was written explaining the voyage so that it reaches the Spanish king. On 15 February, the admiral reaches Azores, where the people of Santa Maria seize the boat and its crew by faking to be friendly. Columbus encounters another storm and saves his crew from the natives. Columbus left Azores on 24 February and sailed through bad weather to Lisbon. On 4th March, he had anchored near Rastello and sent messages to announce his arrival. The king congratulated Columbus and showered him with accolades. Thereafter, he left for Castile, where his victory is celebrated. He even accompanied the king on one side as he rode through Barcelona, a privilege received only by the late prince. The voyage is described as a great success. Columbus' letters mention that he took possession of all the islands he found and the people did not offer any resistance. The islands were named after the Lord and the king. All these islands are described as extremely fertile. Then he goes on describing the wonder that was Hispaniola, rich with spices, gold, and other metals. The people are described as barbaric, going around naked, but kind. It is insisted persuasively that on acquiring slight assistance from the king, all the resources and riches can be brought from these islands.
After the success of Columbus's first voyage, he had little trouble convincing the Spanish sovereigns Ferdinand and Isabella to follow up with the second one. Unlike the exploratory nature of the former voyage, the second one was in fact a massive colonization effort, comprising as many as 17 ships and over 1,000 men. 25th September 1493 was when he left the Spanish shores for what we can justifiably call the starting point of the long and tragic history of transatlantic exchanges, which did not even spare human beings being treated as mere commodities. Historian T. Todorov informs us that there were primarily three motives that drove Columbus to undertake another ambitious expedition to the fairly unfamiliar lands towards the west. The first was, of course, human, which, put in simple terms, was an expression of the innate human greed for limitless wealth. The nature of the second motive was divine, which follows logically from the first motive, as he claimed to use the newfound riches to fund the efflorescence of Christianity back home. Knowing this makes it easier to understand why the reigning Pope, Alexander VI, most liberally granted them not only what they had conquered so far, but also everything that they will conquer, should they discover further west. The third motive can be linked to a delight in nature, which shows that, for them, quite literally, the grass was indeed greener on the other side. From the long paragraphs about the lush green landscapes dotted with exotic, vibrant birds, otherworldly beasts, unheard of plant species, and of course, non-white humans, we can read into their bewildered and fascinated minds, the minds which eventually prompted them to act in whichever way possible to capture all that they could of this bountiful paradise. However, as we'll see, they could not be an Alice to their newfound wonderlands. Before we delve any further into the dynamic encounters and succeeding developments, let us sketch the itinerary of Second Voyage. Like his first voyage, Columbus first sailed to the Canary Islands located south of Spain in the Atlantic Ocean, which were then controlled by the Spanish monarchs. Early November in 1493, the fleet reached the Caribbean, venturing more southwards this time. The The island we know today as Dominica was in fact nomenclatured such by him and was one of his early spotting, consequently moving northwards to the islands of Marigalante and Guadeloupe. Along the way, strings of smaller islets were explored and renamed, including Antigua, Montserrat, San Croix, etc. On his way to the erstwhile Spanish base at La Navidad in Hispaniola, Columbus named another island, San Juan Bautista, after Saint John the Baptist, which we know today as Puerto Rico. Although the crew was shocked to witness La Navidad crumbled by Taino natives, they sailed along the northern coast and the settlement of La Isabela. Still believing that he had reached the far east of Asia and searching for China, he encountered Cuba and conceived it to be a mainland. Few days later, Columbus discovered Jamaica down south. Taking a roundabout to Cuba and the Isle of Youth in its southern fringes, he returned back to Hispaniola, this time in Santo Domingo in the south. He circumnavigated back to his primary base at La Isabela before sailing back to Spain in March 1496. Having known the circuit sketch of Columbus's steps, we can now better understand the second voyage from his own worldview, which, as mentioned before, was articulated by him through the three spheres of human, divine, and nature. The sphere of divinity is associated with Christianity. The American myth of Columbus as a modern, secular, and scientific man does not seem to hold any ground when the true motives of his voyages are brought to the fore. Far from being a Renaissance spirit as he has been portrayed purposefully in the widely circulated school textbooks, Columbus saw himself as the chosen one, as charged with a divine mission. His vision was tinted so much with the Christian belief system that he saw divine intervention everywhere, from the movement of waves to the discovery of gold in the Indies. Several scholars have argued that Columbus's voyages were a direct product of his excessive ambition and obsession for wealth. However, what is significant is that this extreme form of intrinsic human tendency was not untied with the desire to impose the true God. The two theological tasks that fed fuel to his ambitions were to discover a sea route to the Indies, to acquire sufficient gold from the Indies to fund a final crusade for liberation of Jerusalem. Such was the yearning for the fulfillment of the Christian cause that Columbus saw only what he wanted to see, the prospects of a universal Christendom. Following are the lines from his second voyage. These Indians seemed so well disposed that they could be converted if we had an interpreter, for they imitate everything that we do. They all say that they wish to be Christians, although actually they are idolaters. These lines clearly don't make any effort whatsoever to hide Columbus's predispositions. The divine motive that he claimed in his first voyage bore fruit in his second voyage, when he finally discovered gold on the raw islands of the Indies.
Coming to the human aspect of his second voyage, his perception of and exchanges with the locals hold immense significance not only for tracing the beginnings of the long and cruel history of subjugation and enslavement of the natives, but also to uncover the intricacies of initial interactions between the inhabitants of the old and the new worlds. The accounts of the second voyage inform us of the various ways in which the preliminary communication took place through persuasion, capture, or even on the natives' own accord. There is an undertone of judgment and disgust with the way of living of the Indians, especially the Caribs. In numerous descriptions of the Carib people, they are unequivocally portrayed as beastly, embodying everything opposite of Western civilizational values. Taking an account of the inherent biases of the original accounts, these are nonetheless important sources of knowing about the superficial details of Native American existence, which existed before it was destroyed by the very ones who took immense pride in discovering it. What is also ironical is that Columbus's men hated Caribs on the account of the stories told by other Indians about how they held captive members of other tribes, and yet they show no remorse of doing the same to the natives, that too in the disguise of doing the greater good. When Columbus returned to Hispaniola, he found out that the men whom he had left behind during his first voyage had raped the indigenous women and angered the population. As a response, the indigenous people had attacked the settlement, slaughtering the Europeans to the last men. What is interesting is that Columbus, not even bothered slightly about the actions of his men, went on to lay the blame of killing the Christians on Kaunabo, a rival chief, after consulting his indigenous chieftain ally Guacanagri. He and his men then attacked, routing the Onabo and capturing and enslaving many of the people. Other than this, the human sphere of his actions included observing the natives to take advantage of the resources at their disposal, establishing new settlements in different islands, and punishing of capturing and bringing enslaved indigenous people to Spain. Coming to the third and the last aspect, the bountiful nature of the warm and tropical New World amused Columbus and his accompanists. There are vivid descriptions and narratives by Hernando Colon, the admiral's son, and Dr. Diego Alvarez Chanca, a companion among other sources that shed light on this voyage, which captured the lush green landscape and the sheer biological diversity harbored in the islands they encountered. An island covered with pine trees was named Evangelista, later known as the Isle of Pines. Another group of tiny islands was named Gardens of the Queen, mesmerized by its sandbanks and reefs furrowed by narrow channels, insidious yet green and beautiful. Hernando gives us an account of how Isabella's fertile tracts and promising yields delighted Columbus. Sown only 2 months ago, the melons ripened well, cucumbers grew in only 20 days, wild vines produced large bunches of grapes. It took as less as 7 days for sugarcane to germinate, and so on and so forth. In this context, we should also look into what we call the Columbian Exchange, that refers to the exchange of ideas, food crops, population, and even diseases between the Old World and the New World, initiated by this very Second Voyage. The Old World, by which we mean not just Europe, but the entire Eastern Hemisphere, gained from the Columbian Exchange in a number of ways. Discoveries of new supplies of metals are the best known in sources. But the Old World also gained new staple crops such as sweet potatoes, maize, and cassava. The hallmark ingredients found in cuisines of the Old World, such as tomatoes, chili peppers, peanuts, pineapples, and cacao, also had their own seafaring adventure in their discovery and, well, let's say, colonization of the Mediterranean, Indian, Southeast Asian cooking pots. Imagine missing out on our favorite arrabbiata and bolognese sauces, and even the classic Neapolitan pizza had not the tomato traveled all the way to Europe. Even the potato was not discovered until much late by the Spaniards, but well, at least Columbus opened that door in 1492, because I don't know how to imagine many cult classic Indian dishes as we know them today without potatoes, tomatoes, or chilies. Probably the only good thing out of this entire endeavor. Tobacco, another New World crop, was also so universally adopted that it came to be used as a substitute for currency in many parts of the world. The exchange also drastically increased the availability of many Old World crops, such as sugar and coffee, which were particularly well suited for the soils of Columbus's newfound wonderland. Columbus also brought pigs, cows, chickens, and horses to the islands of the Caribbean. But, the picture was not at all hunky-dory like it sounds. European contact enabled the transmission of diseases to previously isolated communities. Europeans brought deadly viruses and bacteria such as smallpox, measles, typhus, and cholera, for which the Native Americans had no immunity, resulting into huge decimation of indigenous population. On their way back home, the sailors brought syphilis to Europe. Although less deadly, this disease also caused great social disruption on the other side. Effects of the Columbian Exchange were not really isolated to Europe and the Americas that were directly participating. It also had large, although less direct, impacts on Africa and Asia. The New World discovery of quinine, the first malaria cure that worked, facilitated European exploration and settlement of these continents' extensive tropical regions. In addition, the Americas' cultivation of profit-generating crops and the disease-ravaged local population created a need for labor that led to the enslavement and forced migration of nearly 12 million Africans between the 16th and the 19th centuries.
Columbus's discovery of the Americas is a bit like arriving at the party just to find out that it's been going on for ages. In this case, the indigenous people were the hosts all along. It's the case of arriving fashionably late and mistakenly thinking you are the first to arrive. Columbus didn't exactly discover America, he stumbled upon it while hunting for a shortcut to Asia. Throughout 4 expeditions, he sailed around the Caribbean islands, convinced he had finally reached the outskirts of Asia. But hey, everyone makes mistakes, right? Columbus was quite a wordsmith when it came to describing the indigenous people he encountered. It's like he had a kaleidoscope of terms and descriptions at his disposal, painting a vivid picture of his own colorful perceptions and biases. He praised their hospitality and generosity, but also depicted them as primitive and in need of Christian conversion. He dived deep into their looks, customs, and daily lives, often making them sound like characters straight out of a storybook. Suddenly, they are fierce warriors one minute, and the next they are starring in their own cannibal horror show. Columbus may have unintentionally written the script for Europe's savage fascination. While he occasionally threw them the bone of humanity, his pen was more of a double-edged sword, slicing through stereotypes and leaving behind a trail of marginalization. The admiral had this charming habit of mixing confidence with naivety and a generous amount of greed. He was convinced that wherever he sailed, there would be rivers flowing with gold and treasures beyond imagination. It's almost endearing how he admitted to being clueless about the lands he was discovering, but couldn't resist the allure of wealth and fame. Columbus was like a kid in a candy store, except the candy was gold, jewels, and spices. And of course, he never entertained the thought that maybe, just maybe, those lands were not sitting on the mountains of treasure. But who needs caution when you have got dreams of glory and riches to fuel your sails, right? Columbus had this habit of filtering everything through his Christian lens. To him, the indigenous people were like blank canvas, lacking in religion, language, and law. Basically, according to him, they were starting from scratch in the culture department, waiting for the Christians and Spanish to fill in the colors and bring culture to their supposed barren lives. Columbus also paid scant regard to foreign languages, seemingly oblivious to the concept of linguistic diversity. Despite his proficiency in Genoese, Latin, Portuguese, and Spanish, his ideological convictions seemed to obscure his appreciation for the nuances of other languages. This oversight was evident in his decision to transport indigenous people to Spain in hopes of facilitating their acquisition of Spanish lifestyle, totally overlooking the fundamental fact that these individuals had their own language as well as their culture. Thus, his disregard for linguistic diversity and cultural nuances further underscored his Eurocentric worldview, leading to hindered ability to effectively communicate and engage with indigenous people, increasing misunderstandings and conflicts with them. Upon his arrival in the Caribbean, Columbus instigated a pattern of exploitation and brutality that would later characterize European colonialization. He and his crew captured, enslaved, and subjected indigenous populations to forced labor, violence, and the introduction of diseases such as smallpox. The profound devastation wrought by these actions cannot be overstated, resulting in the widespread decimation of indigenous cultures and populations. Despite the controversies surrounding his legacy, Columbus's voyages are of historical significance. Columbus, a navigator par excellence, birthed a new world but found himself adrift between two epochs, unable to anchor his way in the uncharted waters of change. his misstep, clinging to the familiar shores of the old, while venturing into the boundless expanse of the new, paving the way for the tragic dance between old world ideals and new world realities. Thank you for watching.